I am presently studying a PhD to look at that question of what is the role of a safety professional, and I do appreciate that's somewhat ironic because I've been taking a salary for almost 20 years from organisations to perform exactly that role, but I do believe we're at a point as a profession of really trying to understand if we know what our role is and what purposes we're serving within an organisation. And behind this question is the fact, I think, that the safety profession is entirely discretionary. Although events of the last couple of weeks in Queensland with the reintroduction of the WHOSO gives us a little bit of mandatory nature of our role potentially, organisations don't need to have us. In fact, many organisations, small, medium enterprise, operate quite well, quite successfully and quite safely today without any safety professional within their organisation. So the question is then, what is the role and what is the value that a safety professional adds to an organisation? We might think that our role is to keep people safe and to prevent incidents, and those in Kelvin's session earlier, I'm sure some of us would think that's our role. In 2015, David Boris did a literature review of 68 research publications and only found 2 studies which were able to demonstrate a strong relationship between the presence or the practice of safety professionals and organisational safety outcomes in terms of incident or fatality rates. It's a very, very small portion of research given the global safety profession over the last 30 years, and none of this research, even those 2 studies, identified a causal link between the safety professional and safety outcomes. So with that as a backdrop, I want to explore this title, The Past, the Present and the Future of Safety Professional Practice. I'll introduce this topic. I want to talk about it in 3 ways. I want to talk about what we know about safety professionals over the last 30 years and how we've got to where we are today. I want to put some propositions on the table about what I think present-day practice looks like, managing safety modes of control in organisations, and we heard a little bit about that, I'm sure, today already. And then I want to talk about the future of safe professional practice. And I also want to do what I hope to do, which I don't think is done very well, is to create some bridges between the past, the present and the future. The safety profession has developed in its current form over the last 25 or 30 years. And this slide describes as 25 factors that I believe, from reviewing the literature, more than 100 publications since the mid-80s on safe professional practice, drives the way our roles are shaped and performed within organisations. I used a social theory lens. You might be more familiar with structure, agency and identity, but institutional, relational and individual factors that drive, shape, constrain and enable the performance of our roles every day. Starting on the left-hand side, by far the largest influence are the institutional factors. We know these exist outside our organisation. We talk a lot about regulation, professional associations, safety education over the last 20 or 25 years. But I became curious as to why these organisations became different, because largely these external constraints are consistent across industry and particularly consistent within organisations when you get down into the bottom left-hand corner there. The commercial objectives of organisations, safety measurement, safety bureaucracy, culture, structure, job design. Why then within the same organisation is safety professional practice so different? And some professionals are effective and some professionals aren't. The largest study, by the way, into safe professional practice was conducted in the early or mid-2000s, now gone across more than 8,000 safe professionals in 15 countries, conducted by Hale and Guldemund, and they looked at what the tasks of safe professionals are. And it came back quite consistently, going back 10 years around the world, that safe professionals are there to write policies, perform risk assessments, to investigate incidents, and to develop and facilitate safety training. More than 60% of safety professionals in more than 60% of countries spend a significant portion of their time on those things. And what happens then is that professional associations go, we understand the role. We can accredit to those types of activities. And safety educators, institutions go, we know what the role is. And we can teach people how to do that and do that better. And my belief is that we've been on a treadmill for the last 10 or 12 years, thinking we know what the role is, teaching and accrediting against that role, performing that role, influencing and convincing the organisation that that's what the role is, and repeating the cycle. The answer to safety professional effectiveness, I believe, lies in the middle box. We talk about these things as influence, trust, credibility, interpersonal skills. I've defined them out of the literature as challenge, authority, alliance, and influence. But these constructs, these social and relational constructs, define our professional effectiveness within organisations. But what they also do, and you'll see some complication in that middle box, and I won't go through it all, you can read the paper on the internet, it's available through ResearchGate. It's actually really, really complicated. Socially, organisationally, I think our roles are the most complicated roles in organisations to get right. We are there and meant to be involved in everything with zero authority to do anything. And safety emerges everywhere in the organisation, from all aspects of work, from the planning to the execution of work at all levels and across all domains in the organisation. So this then becomes our challenge. So what we've done for the last, I think, 25 years is develop our mode of safety control really, really effectively. I mentioned earlier that you might think that our role is to prevent incidents. I actually believe that our role is to help organisations enhance their capacities to deliver their mode or their brand of safety. Now, if an organisation's mode or brand of safety is control, then our job becomes to enhance that mode of control within organisations. So on this slide, I've started to try to practically describe these things that I believe are the capacities that organisations are striving to achieve in their models of control, and then to supplement that with some safety professional activities that would enhance and support those organisational capacities. We may not like this. We might not like to think of ourselves as safety cops. We might not like those terms. We might think that we're much more than control and compliance focused. The literature would largely disagree with us. We've called things by different names, but wolf in sheep's clothing is still a wolf. And all of these things that we implement in organisations, whether they're systems or cultural or behavioural programs and activities, they're all based around the organisation developing the requirements, the social practices and the cultural norms that we seek all parts of that organisation to conform and to align with. That is a safety mode of control. We might call it culture, we might call it behaviour, we might call it empowerment, us allowing others to have a small piece of accountability for something, but these are all modes of control. I hope you can recognise some of those things, identify hazard, develop controls, monitor those controls, line management, accountability for safety, safety culture, commitment, prioritisation programs, and I'm sure, as I do, see myself in a lot of those activities below: task-based, risk identification, assessment, control, incident investigation, audit, behavioural observations, supporting line management decision-making, last line of defence, helping workers just stop at a point of last resort, and promoting culture improvement programs. We have got very good at doing this in the last 25 years. In fact, we are very good at doing this. However, I was told there was going to be a different slide in between. I said one extra slide, so there's a different version of this presentation which has this big black screen. Anyway, I'll describe it for you. So the big black screen was going to say, however, these constructs in the mid-90s, we started to hear about resilience engineering. In the mid-2000s, we heard about Safety 2 from Eric Holnagel. And more recently, we hear a lot about safety differently in talks today. So this new theory of safety has emerged, and it describes a worldview that is purported to be opposite and counter to our traditional control and compliance view about safety. So where does that leave us? Does that mean if we want to do Safety 2 in our organisation, we have to abandon every aspect of Safety 1? The answer is no. Both theoretically and practically, it is not a choice. It's a paradox. Both are true in an organisation all the time, and both are true and present in your organisation today. There is a constant tension between dependable role performance and control over what is going on in your organisation and how to make sure that the organisation functions and supports the organisation's purposes, and how people have the flexibility and freedom to adapt and respond to changing situations and emerging conditions that the procedures and the plans can't cater for. So although the safety literature, with some exceptions, René Amalberti was one that talked about needing to balance deference to protocol with deference to expertise. The safety management literature and the common understanding of it pits these two as opposing forces or opposing camps, if you like. You're one or the other. But for the last 50 years, organisational and social theorists have actually described this tension much more eloquently. In 1964, Daniel Katz said, and I quote, "The greatest paradox of a social organisation is that it must not only reduce human variability to ensure reliable role performance, but it must also make room for some variability and in fact encourage it for the organisation to be successful." Cultural anthropologists like Pierre Bourdieu in the 70s and social psychologists like Anthony Giddens in the 80s describe this paradox, this constant challenge that we all have in our daily lives of determinism versus free will, and where that paradox rests. So I want to start by saying that I don't believe it's a choice, but what I do believe is the pendulum in most of our organisations is sitting too far to the mode of control, and we need to find a way to settle that pendulum back a bit more between the two different views of safety. And that is our job, that's your job, that's the organisation's job to understand in what context where that pendulum should sit between knowing how something is going to happen and managing for it to happen that way, versus not knowing how something needs to happen and allowing for it to emerge based on the people who know most about that situation. So now, I'll go back. You'll read that otherwise. So what do I think is some of the challenges with the Safety 2 literature? I want to point to three challenges. The first is that it is positioning itself as diametrically opposed to Safety 1. I think one of the second challenges in our understanding or the literature is some of the practical limitations of the theory in terms of dealing with the practical realities of organisations. And the third is the complete lack of consideration given to what it means for us as the people who are hopefully there to steward our organisation's understanding and practice about safety is how should it change our role. So I do believe that most organisations should provide a greater emphasis on an adaptability mode of safety, or a Safety 2 or resilience engineering mode of safety. And you'll be able to read this shortly when I publish it, and I'll publish it in quite some detail. But I am trying to do those things, which is describe what those organisational capacities are. We hear a lot that Safety 2 is about ensuring the presence of positive capacities in the organisation. I've taken a step to try to define what I think those capacities are and label them. And you'll see there in the top 6, synchronisation, autonomy, porous boundaries, anticipation, slack, and sacrifice judgments. Now this comes out of a review of the resilience engineering literature and working with particularly Sydney Decker and Dave Woods in the US around representing the resilience literature in terms of those organisational capacities, and then creating a bridge to what we might do in our roles to enable those capacities. And you'll see there I've listed 8 activities, coincidentally. We understand a little bit about appreciative inquiries to narrow the gap between work as imagined and work as done, but we haven't previously offered much else for what it might do to shape the way that we perform our role. But what you'll see in there is it does get more complicated. It does get more complex. Safety drops away. Work and organisation and system replaces previous conversations about safety. We know that goal conflict challenges safety margins within organisations. So in the future, safety professionals will need to be able to adjust budgets, adjust production targets, project schedules, requisition and redistribute operational resources to match demands on the front line, support local practices, facilitate decision making at the point of action based on emergent conditions. We'll need to facilitate information flows freely within, across organisational boundaries, inside, outside of our organisation in real time to understand what needs to change to be done to maintain the safety of our operations. These activities that you'll see there are about understanding and facilitating work and decision making every day, I believe will do those things that the literature tells us becomes present in organisations that overemphasise safety modes of control. I mean, we know that accidents that we all understand aren't caused by whether a paragraph in a safety policy was not the right paragraph, or whether the content of a safety induction training program was the wrong content. We know that doesn't create fire and explosion and aircraft to fall out of the sky. What reviews into those major disasters tell us is that the mode of control overemphasised in organisation marginalises local safety knowledge from ALMCOV. Diane Vaughan talks about normalisation of deviance and structural secrecy to get around the control and compliance in the organisation. Dave Woods would talk about brittleness at organisational boundaries where information doesn't flow because people don't know how it will be received. Holnagle would talk about that gap between workers imagined and workers done, and that breakdown between decision making in the organisation not being in service of the realities of frontline work. And Sydney Decker would talk about the unjust and the retributive culture that closes down learning and communication in the organisation at the very times and on the very issues that you need an openness of communication and an openness of learning. I did talk a lot about influence and relational in the literature review, and it's easy for me to stand here and paint a picture. It's even easier for me to write it down and publish a picture of what this looks like. I don't know how it gets done in organisations. I don't know how we as safety professionals are able to play a role where we can be at every level, across every domain, involved in potential every decision, with the ability to influence the way that those decisions are made at the time they're being made, different to what we do today. But we do need to break out of our safety comfort zone, which is anything that doesn't have the word safety attached to it is an area in the organisation that we don't play. If it's not safety system or safety program or safety culture or safety training, it doesn't involve us. No, it does. In fact, probably more so, because the decisions that are being made about production targets, resourcing levels, procurement strategies, business development, those are the things that point the organisation's trajectory towards success or otherwise. We are going to need less prescription in our own role descriptions. We're going to need the flexibility and autonomy to be curious and to go in places in the organisation. So the organisation is going to have to give us the ability to just, on any given day or any given week, define where we think we need to be, what we think we need to be involved in, what's happening in real time in the organisation. And these are not things that organisations deal well with. This openness and autonomy that we talk about for our workforce, we need the same openness and autonomy in our roles. And like I said earlier, it's not about throwing away all of the things that we've come to manage really well in the mode of control and moving to a mode of adaptability. But what I do believe it is actually trying to find a balance in the organisation. I've started to talk about safety 1.5, which is, as a practicing safety professional in organisations, is where an organisation can actually rest that pendulum between the good parts of safety 1 and the good parts of safety 2, balanced within the practicalities and realities of organisational life. So what I've hoped to have done in this presentation, I have no idea how long it's been, but what I hope to have done was to summarise 30 years of literature, and that's available for you guys to read, the model I showed. What I've hoped to paint a picture of is some practical description of the capacities and the safe professional activities that I think we do today in our existing modes of control in all of our organisations. Well, in my organisation, I suspect in many of yours, and then start to paint a practical picture of this safety 2 safety mode of adaptability, what it's trying to deliver in terms of organisational capacities and what it might mean for our safety professional activities. And I realise I provided no answers or solutions for how to do this, because this is hard. And we need to start to, I think, ground out more detail around this and start to work in our own roles of trying to find a balance and seeing what happens in our organisations. And with that, thank you, and I welcome comments and questions.